Am I right to be worried about the defensive line, the pass rush this year? It's one of my biggest concerns. We're going to talk about somebody who can shed more light on that on today's Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. As always, really do appreciate everybody tuning in. And we got a great one today. We're just going to jump into it. We got Michael Hogan coming in. Mike is a writer over on Rivals, previously 247. He's been covering the Badgers for a couple years, puts out a lot of great content. Thank you so much for jumping on the show.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, of course. And we have a lot of ground I want to cover today, so we're just going to get into it. I want to start with some of the questions I had. The first one was, and I mentioned it in the tease, I'm terrified we're not going to have a pass rush this year. Am I right, wrong? Where do you think we are at from a pass rushing standpoint?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because, obviously you lost, they lost Herbig and Benton, and those were really the only two guys that were really productive there in terms of like numbers, like sacks and pressures and all that. But the other interesting part of it is like, we haven't really gotten to see like Darian Varner on the field yet. Like, he was kind of working his way back in Platteville. He was getting like back into the groove of things, getting some reps here and there, but like, we didn't see a ton of them. So like we haven't seen like the full scope of his abilities. By now I'm sure he's gotten more reps in practice, but we haven't been there since we haven't gotten watch practice since mid last week. They shut everything down as they typically do, as they kind of start preparing for games here. So I'll be curious to see what kind of impact he makes, barring, hopefully for their sake, he didn't suffer a setback. And then you look at like those outside linebackers too. It seems like it's going to be kind of a by committee approach at that position this year. They really like Daryl Peterson and, TJ Bowlers, Caden Johnson, Jeff Petrowski Jr. I think all those guys kind of add something different to the defense. They have different skill sets. They can use them in different situations. They've kind of talked about that. Matt Mitchell yesterday, who also was very high on CJ Getz. He said that CJ Getz has really, really improved as a pass rusher from throughout the spring and into camp. It's continued. Getz talked yesterday about how a lot of that has to do with his work with Brady Collins, the strength conditioning coach. He really went hard at it in the summer and really studied, who he is as a pass rusher and kind of has a better understanding of his strengths and his weaknesses there and what moves work for him and what don't work. He talked a lot about that yesterday. So I think he's another interesting guy to watch. If they can get, some more production from him. He had 2 sacks last year, and I think he was maybe a little underappreciated by folks on the outside. I think he had a pretty good year, all things considered. That was really his first, even though he had been around the program for a while, that was really his first year playing that many snaps and starting that many games. It was his first time as a full-time starter. So I think he's an interesting guy to watch. And obviously, the inside linebackers too are going to be relied on. Muma Najong-Menta and Jordan Turner. Both those guys are looking to take their next steps as pass rush. And I think Jake Chaney's really intriguing there too. I think he might, they're going to have 3 basically starters at that position, but I think Chaney is probably going to steal snaps from both of them. I really like what he's done. When we got to watch him in the practices that we were able to view, and the coaching staff seemed really high on him. So, they have a lot of unknowns. I think you're right to be concerned about it. They have just, nobody's really shown it yet at the collegiate level. There's a lot of guys who are going to need to take big steps, and you wonder, can Varner, number one, is he going to be healthy enough to play week 1? Number 2, is it going to translate to the Big Ten? Because it is a difference. He was playing in the American Athletic Conference last year. It's the same kind of question people have about Mordecai this year. So I think a lot of intriguing guys there. We'll see who. It's going to be really fascinating to see who kind of steps up when the games begin here in a couple weeks.
Let me continue with Varner here. Is there a sense around the program that he could be that guy that elevates the unit, or is there maybe a sense around the program that he's just another piece of the rotation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's that he can be a really big difference maker. When we talked to Greg Scruggs in the spring, I asked him what he expects Varner to be able to, add to the defense. And he said that he really expects him to add a lot of juice in the way of pass rush production. He was really productive in the games he played in last year before he got hurt. He had 3.5 or maybe 4 of his sacks in one game. So he has that ability to kind of take over games. And we did see him in like a one-on-one pass rush drill against, Jack Nelson. He won the first battle convincingly, Varner, and then Nelson got him back. So that was really the fact that he was able to kind of, it's a one-on-one drill. So you kind of have to be careful taking too much from it. But I thought that he does kind of, when we did in that small burst that we did get to see him, he does have really, really impressive power. It's really easy to see too. He's got a really big, powerful lower body. He's quick. He has the prototypical size too. I think he really intriguing player that way. And yeah, I mean, every time we've talked to Coach Scruggs and other folks, other coaches, the expectations are high for Varner. They really think that he can give them quite a bit in terms of production. And I still think you're going to need other guys to step up. You can't just have that be what you're counting on. You're going to need, Rodas Johnson and James Thompson Jr., 2 other guys. I thought at the end of last year, I don't think it really showed up on the stat sheet, but I thought they were good, especially against the run. And I know James Thompson had a sack last year. I believe Rodas did too. So those are 2 other guys that they have all like the physical tools and things that you like, but can it all come together this year is the question for them. Can they be consistent enough to consistently make an impact on that part of the game?
Right. And that's the big question. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you think at the end of the year, we're going to look back and say, yes, it did come together? The past, maybe, I mean, I'm not expecting Reggie White and, that type, but did it come together? Or do you think at the end of the year, we're going to look back and say it wasn't quite there?
It's hard to say because like, it's always hard to tell in fall camp practices, like how much pressure actually got to the quarterback. Mm-hmm. It's just so it's kind of odd with, the contact is limited. If I'm a betting man, if I'm predicting, I think people will be fine with what they get out of the pass rush. Cause I think it's going to come from a lot of different guys. I think, Varner's going to be one of them that they're counting on, but like I said, they're going to need others to step up. I think the inside linebackers are going to be more productive. People forget too. I mean, I think, going back to last year, I think that was like kind of an underrated storyline. Like those 2 guys, Turner and Najong Mena, were first-time starters replacing 2 really, really good players. Mm-hmm. There's always kind of going to be a learning curve. And, they're more comfortable. Chaney started some games last year and got more comfortable. So I think you're going to see a step up from those guys. I think it's going to be a really collective effort. Matt Mitchell said it yesterday about his position group. I think the same could be said for pretty much the whole defense with the linebackers and the defensive line.
That's a great point with the inside linebackers. Last year being their first year and kind of growing as they went on. That's a really good point because now they're back with that year of experience. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. Give me an underrated storyline, something that people aren't talking about enough, good or bad, or somewhere in between coming out of fall.
God, I hope people don't freak out about this, but I think it's the offensive line. It's not being talked about enough. It was hard to tell what their plan was. Renfro obviously was hurt in the spring. He lasted maybe 2 practices, and then he went off with an injury, a lower body injury, stress fracture in his left leg, I believe, or yes, it was left leg. Not that it matters. He had a stress fracture. That's the bottom line. So he missed time. They had to. Bortolini has been playing center. I don't know what's changed since practices were closed to us. So it's kind of all guesswork until we get the depth chart. Bortolini's been playing center and he's still kind of been having some problems with the snaps. It's been better overall, but I still think, it's been a little concerning at times because a bad snap for this offense throws off the entire play. A lot of it has to do with timing. They want to get the ball out quick a lot of the time. So, was Renfro getting those second team reps because it was part of his ramp up process, or do they think that Bortolini is better there? Or are they not comfortable with Renfro getting those first team reps yet? Do they still think he needs some time to ramp up? So like this whole thing has implications on the guard spots. Like if the plan is for Bortolini to start at center, then does that mean, Huber is going to start at left guard? And, there was Wedig was getting snaps at right guard along with Fertney. Those two kind of seem like they're in a competition. But if the plan is for Renfro to start at center, and if he's already returned to that spot with the first team since practices were closed to the media, presumably Bortolini would move back to left guard, but that would kind of leave three guys battling for the right guard spot. So I still think they kind of either way, they have things to sort through on the offensive line, and how that kind of looks. I think maybe it's not as big as concern because they do plan to use somewhat of a rotation at those guard spots. Specifically, Bicknell has talked about, being comfortable with, 6 or 7 guys, Wedig, Bortolini, Huber, and then you obviously got the, Fertney, and I don't think you'll see the tackles come out at all. I think they're comfortable with what they have in Malman and Nelson. Obviously you don't tackle rotations, I don't think are as common as guard rotations. So yeah, I think that's the one thing, I don't know how much it's been written about. I wrote about it after we were done with our access to practice, just what we didn't learn. I don't think we learned what the starting 5 is going to look like, or let alone what the rotation is going to look like, because a lot of it depends on who's on that top spot in the depth chart.
The offensive line is fascinating to me because it feels like Badger fans have been waiting for 2 years for this young talent that, to really ripen. And you talk about Wedig, Malman, Nelson, Rucci, et cetera, et cetera. Is this the year Brunner's another 4-star guy who saw reps last year? Is this the year that starts to bear fruit, all that young recruiting talent? Or to your point, is it still a bit of a mix and we don't really know?
It's hard to say. I don't know about Rucci yet at tackle. I mean, that's a tough spot for him to be in. He's behind Jack Nelson, who's could be next year an NFL draft pick in 2024. So, I mean, he's a guy they're really high on. Tough path for him. Brunner too, same thing. I mean, he's maintained those second team reps throughout the fall camp, but they have quite a logjam at guard already with Bortolini, Huber, Wedig, Fertney, guys who played at this level before and who've been consistent, I guess it would be the right word. And I think they're really high on Huber. That's what it seems. And then, JP Benchall too, another guy who's gotten second team reps, but like where is his path? Like, I don't know if there's a clear path yet. If I had to guess, I think some of those guys are still a year away, but you never know what can happen with injuries, right? Like it's football. There's always an injury risk when you're on the field. And I don't know. I mean, we haven't asked Bicknell about some of those young guys, so we don't know like how he feels about them yet. But they've obviously the overwhelming consensus, talk about the offensive line from the spring onward has been Bicknell feels really good about the 2 units, those top 2 units. He said he jokes all the time. I wish I could have had this, these top 2 units everywhere, because there is a lot of depth and talent. But we'll see with some of these young guys, because they're just behind older players who are either performing better or they just trust more at this point. So yeah, it's tough. I don't know. We'll see. Brunner or Rucci or some of those guys this year. It depends on what happens, really.
Well, and that's something I had Phil Steele on the show, and he talked to Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell mentioned he's never had the depth along the offensive line that he has in this program right now. So I know there's a lot of people internally that are optimistic about it. We're going to take a quick break for friends of the show. We're going to come back. We're going to talk if Michael is more optimistic or pessimistic after seeing practice. Do we feel better or worse? Plus any young players that may have popped. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for friends of the show over at Nutrafol. New friends of the show. Nutrafol is a great way for men who may have thinning hair. If you're trying to increase your hair growth, your hair health, Nutrafol provides a whole body health approach for men that promotes healthier hair. No drugs, no compromise, just better hair. Men think losing hair is inevitable. 80% of men will eventually lose some portion of their hair. They'll have some type of hair thinning. It's normal. It doesn't have to be your fate. It doesn't have to be your real life. That's why you can get ahead of the game with Nutrafol. If you're tired of that weakening or thinning hair, if you want to reach your full hair potential, use the leading hair growth supplement, Nutrafol, which will help improve your hair growth, visible thickness, and visible scalp coverage. #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, clinically proven to show hair growth, visible thickness, and visible scalp coverage. Supports healthy full body hair health. Again, it's not just about the hair, it's about promoting full body health. And it works. In a clinical study, 84% That's a pretty good percentage there of men showed improvement in their hair after 6 months taking Nutrafol hair growth supplements. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code LockedOnCollege. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men. Enter promo code LockedOnCollege. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code LockedOnCollege. And want to take a second to say thank you to everybody who's tuning in. As always, really do appreciate it. Let's get back in here. Let's get Mike back on the show because, again, that's why people are here. Mike, I do want to take a quick second. Where can people find your work and what you're doing?
They can find me at BadgerBlitz.com, part of the Rivals Network, and then at Hogan Reports on Twitter. The handle is obviously right below my name here on the show.
And I definitely recommend give him a follow. Great writer, really good content. Definitely somebody that I enjoyed, especially some of your past work. Really enjoyed reading it. So let's keep going here. Young players, and we had a comment. I mentioned this to you as something I wanted to talk about. Then we had a comment from Jesse Y as well when he found out you'd be on the show. Who's someone, maybe his comment is, who is someone not on the 2 deep that should be? That kind of goes along with my comment of who's a young player that you think is really impressed but may not be in that 2 deep right now?
That's a good question. A young player on, I'm trying to think because I think he's on the 2 deep right now, but I'm not completely sure. I would go with Jonas Declona here. I think he's continued, especially when the practices we got to see in Platteville. He really performed well and carried over what he did in the spring. He looks confident. He's taken his lumps for sure, as any true freshman corner would do. It's a tough position to play and come in and really compete right away as a young guy, especially going up against receivers this is the best collection of receivers Wisconsin might has ever had. So quite possibly. So, I think he's really shown that he can play this year. He can make an impact this year. It's interesting to see, Nazir Forqueern. I'm still struggling with his last name. I apologize.
Me too.
I think he's been quite the steal so far for them. I think he looks really good. That I've been with it. They have issues, I think, in the slot depth wise, but everywhere else it seems like the cornerback group is better with the transfer additions they brought in, and then also younger guys kind of like Declona and even Jace Arnold. He's made some plays, much better overall in terms of depth. So I would go with Declona there. Maybe, you look at wide receiver, Chris Brooks and Tommy McIntosh were both kind of dealing with some injuries or, minor bumps and bruises that kept them limited in the first week or so of practice. I think both of those guys, when they've been given opportunities with the second team or, the third team, it's just such a fascinating situation at wide receiver because only 6 of them, there's only one ball, and they've pretty much maintained, okay, we want 6 guys. It's going to be tough to play 8 or 9, but I think you could make an argument for one of those 2 guys to maybe be in the top 6, but it's just so tough with the transfers. Maybe Quincy Burrows too. I think he might be the odd man out there, might not get the reps he wants this year. I think maybe he's a year away from really making an impact, but we'll see. Off the top of my head, those are just a couple of the guys, but Declona for sure. It's tough. Mike Mack and the Grand Valley State transfer Nazir. I'll just say Nazir so I don't embarrass myself here anymore with the last name. Those 2 guys might be on the 2 deep, but if I wouldn't be surprised if Declona is. He's really impressed me.
Let me pivot to something you mentioned. They might be. You said they might be in a little bit. I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. Trouble in the slot. Obviously, Jason Maitre is the starter there. Big time transfer that they got. Who's the guy behind them? Because I don't want to talk it into existence, but injuries happen in football. Who's the guy if they need to go to someone else there?
Yeah, right now they've been using Owen Arnett there, was a walk-on safety a couple of years ago. I think he's been fine. I think he can do the job if needed, but he's a safety. He hasn't played that position. He's just learning it. So, that's a tough spot to be in. I'm curious to see if Max Lofi is going to be available to start the year. He's been hurt because he played a little bit of slot last year. And he didn't practice in the spring. been dealing with injury, and he looked like he was just kind of working off to the side in the first couple of fall training camp practices. So if he is healthy, that solves that. That'll be his role. But I guess in an emergency, they could, because now they have more flexibility with those outside corners. They have guys that feel good about transfers. The freshmen are taking steps forward. Maybe they move Alexander Smith in the slot because he can play just about anywhere in the secondary. If you remember last spring, before he got hurt, in fall camp, with the hamstring issue, they were talking about him being, the number one defensive back they have. He's so versatile. He can play safety if needed. He can play in the slot or outside. So, he's a guy they can get creative with. And I also think too, it's, Hunter Wohler is, they use him all over the field. They use him as this hybrid guy who's roaming all over the place and being used in different ways, blitzing, dropping into coverage. I think they could be comfortable with him maybe playing a little bit of slot if needed. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do there if Maitre suffers an injury and has to miss time. I think he's been a great pickup for them. I didn't know how they were really planning on using him at first when they picked him up because he played safety and kind of like Alexander Smith last spring. He was all over the place at Boston College. So I was curious to see how they use him. Really good in the slot. He's physical, not afraid to come up and make plays against the run. Be curious to see if they maybe use him as maybe a pass rusher, as a blitzer sometimes. I think he's got that ability too. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they get into a situation where they need to get creative there, what they do.
And really quick on this one, because a lot of people are excited about last year's transfer class at cornerback. They brought in Jay Shaw from UCLA, Cedric Dort, Justin Clark, a lot of experience. Is this group of three with Forkrin, Mack, and Maitre better than that group? Like, what should fans be excited? Because I felt like the outcome didn't meet the expectations for last year's group of transfers. Not that they were bad. Jay Shaw played a lot. There were some injuries, but is this group better?
Yeah, I would agree that the expectations weren't met last year with that group. Jay Shaw was a all Pac-12 guy. I think he played well, overall, but you didn't get a ton out of him. I don't as much as maybe you would have liked. Justin Clark was pretty much hurt the whole year, dealing with numerous injuries, and then Cedric Dort. I didn't really know what to make of him. So I have higher expectations actually for this group. I think it'll be good. I think Maitre's been impressive so far. I think they like what they got. The other two transfers as well, just for depth purposes. It really makes a huge just to have two more experienced guys back there. And in the case that one of these fresh guys, they're ready to play. They have a guy who's in college football who is, and everybody, his transition to do two, that was a big question. Now, how he he's looked really. It's like you got to take what you see in prime time with the ground and not to, over about it. But I think what's impressive, given the transition he had to make, felt like for maybe 6 practices, maybe even for the entire time we got to all 8 practices, he made a play or two every either pass breakup or interception. He's got that size and long arms that Fickell and Paul Haynes and the staff, kind of looks for in cornerbacks. He fits like the prototype that they want, that they're going to be looking for going forward. And I guess a side note too, on a young guy, everybody loves talking about freshmen, Amari Snowden too. I don't know if he'll play this year. I don't think he will. But God, you can just tell that the length on him is just crazy. And he made a couple plays early on against like the third team or the reserves, the scout team. The pass looked like it was pretty good, and all of a sudden he's got those long arms, reaches up and knocks it away. And I think he was a left-handed. I mean, what a sacrifice for him in a way. I mean, he was a great pitcher in high school, and he's a left-hander. He's got long arms, probably good velocity, I would imagine, on a fastball. I mean, man, that must have been a tough decision for him.
Yeah, that's the type of people baseball scouts call projectable, and they look for that. And that leads into a question we actually had from Miami Rising. There's these are kind of quick fire. He said, "How has Jamel Howard looked in Snowden playing corner safety? I know he's been playing corner. I'm curious, again, I asked this earlier, kind of what's the feel inside the program, if you have any insight. Do you think they see him as a corner long term? Do you see him as a corner long term? And then there is a follow-up question. This is a three-parter. When is Tretch expected back, if you have any follow-up there?
Yeah, and Howard, it's tough to tell right now because he kind of missed, a handful of practices with, an injury in Platteville. I think he was kind of starting to work his way back. First impressions of him, though, he's just massive. I think he has a good future with that size. There's a couple guys in front of him, Gio Paez and Curtis Neal too. So I don't know if this, we'll see, as he continues to come along. So right now I'd probably say, I don't know if we'll see him this year. Snowden, I think I got to stick with corner on that one, just given what the staff looks for in corners, that size, that length. I think he's going to stay at corner just because of what they look for in guys there. And I think they're pretty happy with, their depth at safety. Austin Brown, he'll have a role this year, but next year for sure. You can probably pen him in as a starter next year. And with Tretch, I'm not sure when he's expected back. He was on crutches and in a boot when we were watching practices. It didn't look like he was doing much of anything. So, yeah, not sure there. They haven't been giving like frequent updates on injuries throughout camp, so it's kind of hard for me to say, and I obviously don't want to speculate. But even if he was healthy, I'm not sure. Just with the depth there, I mean, it's hard. It'd be hard for a true freshman to really make a significant move in terms of playing time there.
Yeah, I want to bring on a couple more questions here. We had a bunch of people, when they found out you were on the show, were excited to ask some questions. This one is from Mike Husby. Who is one receiver no one is talking about is going to be a huge difference maker? I think we mentioned before the show, all the receivers are being talked about. Yeah. But what's maybe a receiver out of that group that you think is going to, at the end of the year, we're going to say, wow, even though we were talking about him, we didn't think he would do that?
Yeah, I think the easy answer for me, because just going back to like the offseason and the whole crazy excitement over like it was just one receiver committing after the other with CJ Williams and Bryson Green. And I think both of the Cincinnati guys kind of fell under the radar per se in terms of like the excitement of all the quarterbacks and receivers who are committing. I really like Will Pauling as a guy who will look back on and say, wow, last December, we were not expecting this. Or, I look at the numbers that the slot receivers have put up in Longo's offense. You look at Josh Downs over the last 2 years, over 1,000 yards. He had like 23 touchdowns, led the team in like pretty much every receiving category. Daz Newsome too. He was really productive as a slot guy. And you look at like even going back to like the Ole Miss days with Longo, like AJ Brown, who's now a superstar in the NFL, drafted by the Titans, now with the Eagles. Now, he got most of his snaps out of the slot in like 2018, I believe, and he led the team in pretty much every receiving category. So, yeah, I like Will Pauling as a guy who's going to at this point, I wouldn't call him a surprise because he's been so consistent in practice, but like looking back on after like a year, like thinking, wow, yeah, we did not envision this last year. I guess a couple other comments about the receivers. Bryson Green has just been overwhelming with the size and the strength. I think Longo said on Saturday that like he does some like DK Metcalfish things,
crazy,
which is like a crazy comment, but like you can see it with the size he has. I mean, and he's only going to get bigger as he continues to add. Like, I don't think DK Metcalf ever he was probably huge in college, but I'm guessing he's a little bigger now with the muscle mass and everything. So, he's been great for them. Just as I think during like spring, you look at like the receivers and like they don't really have, like maybe Keontae Lewis was like big downfield, like go over the top of defenders guy, but like Green is even different from that. Like just a different level of strength and size. And when he gets matched up, it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, corner, safety, whatever. It's just if they're a little bit undersized, it's kind of a handful for them. So he's been fun to watch, and we'll see. I'm really interested to see what that first depth chart looks if we get one. On that first week of the season, what that top like 6 receivers looks like. So I think they have some tough decisions to make there. I don't envy that person or Mike Brown or Phil Longo, whoever has to make that decision to who's going to be in the top 6, because there's just a ton of competition there.
No, it's brutal. And a couple more quick questions. I really do appreciate the time. I could keep you with the good guest, and I say this often with the really good guests, we run out of time before we run out of questions. So I really do appreciate it. A couple more quick questions here. This one's from Justin Julka, comes on the show a lot. Is it clear there's a philosophical difference in how they're using the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking like rotationally, like, it seems a lot of it might have to do with just not maybe having that one guy like Keanu Benton for the last couple of years. Fickell wants to roll through, I think he said like 7 or 8 guys there. And I think that's a little different from what they had been doing in recent years. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm curious to see like what situations they use guys in. I don't think we've seen a lot of that yet. It's just been it's practice, so you don't really know. They don't tell us like the practice script or what specifically like they're working on, so it's kind of guesswork in that regard sometimes. But yeah, I mean, rolling through that many guys is interesting. I think they really are putting an emphasis on keeping guys fresh. We'll see. It's interesting that I think last year even there was like fans maybe talking about Mullins being moved inside. They've done that with him. They've moved him. I just don't think they want. I think they want quicker defensive ends who are able to make plays and really impact the game. And I don't think Mullins really has that ability. He's just kind of a stouter guy, bigger guy. They got to put him in the middle. I think you're going to see maybe a change with their defensive ends. They really want those guys to be playmakers, which in the last couple of years, I don't think you could say that about their defensive ends. Henningsen had a good year a couple of years ago. Before my time, I probably couldn't tell you because I've only been here for about 2 or 3 years now. So, I think those are the two of the big things off the top of my head with the defensive line. How many guys that you're going to use, and I think they really want those defensive ends to be productive.
Quick question here on Braedyn Moore. This is from Caleb. He curious about Braedyn Moore. Haven't heard much about him. 4-star safety. Is that a depth chart thing where he's just there's a lot of bodies at safety?
Yeah, actually, I think he's looked pretty good. I probably should have mentioned him earlier with the guy the earlier question about the 2 deep, the guy that maybe deserves a look at it, but probably won't. I think he's one of those guys too. I believe recruited as a corner, if I'm not mistaken. And they've been using him, in all sorts of different ways in camp. And he's gotten work with the second team defense there. Alongside like Preston Zachman. That's another, now that I mention him, he's another guy. Like he might not be on the 2 deep, but he's shown some pretty good things in training camp. I think that safety group, that's like the most intriguing, one of the most intriguing ones to me. Like what it on the defense, like what it looks like in the first couple of weeks. Hunter Wohler, you can basically guarantee him, that's you're not messing with him. He's going to be their guy on defense this year. But Latu and Blaylock and Zachman and Austin Brown, that's a crowded group. I think Moore's looked pretty good so far, but just probably not like a path this year. Next year, maybe more realistic there.
We got in a discussion / argument on this show with me and another guy, Justin. Who's a bigger star this year at the end of the year? Is it Bryson Green or Hunter Wohler?
Oh wow, that's. Can you pick one?
There is a right answer, by the way. I'll see if you get to there.
I'll go with Wohler.
Yes.
I'll go with Wohler just because, if you think back to like last year, that was going to be his breakout year. Like he was going to be used. Jim Leonard was going to use him all over the field, and he looked really good in fall training camp and spring ball. And then he gets injured, and kind of the rest of the year is kind of a wash for him, even though he did return and made some plays. Was probably still getting comfortable and working his way back. Yeah, I think this year Green's going to I have high expectations for Green. Don't get me wrong, but I have probably higher expectations for Wohler. Just making plays all over the field in the practices we watch. They're using him in all sorts of different ways. I don't think people are talking about him as an NFL prospect yet, but maybe at the end of the year they will. Wisconsin fans are probably like screaming no at me right now because they would like him for another year. But I think I don't think it's crazy to say, right? Like, I think he's got the skill set and the abilities to really kind of plant himself on that radar this year. And if he stays healthy, and he has been able to so far, he's looked really good. There's really nothing else more I can add. Everybody else has been saying the same thing. So yeah, he's going to have a big year.
So I agree with you on that, by the way. So you and I are on the same page. Last question here, and again, I could keep going, but I don't want to be selfish with your time. After seeing practice, do you feel better or worse about this team going into the 2023-24 season?
That's a good question. All off season long, I've been kind of like on that like 9 or 10 win. If I had to like just throw out a prediction, I would say I feel a little bit better, just because I feel like they've answered more questions than they haven't in fall camp. I think, you get to see what Green can do. We've gotten to see what Green can do. They do have some questions on the offensive line, but like it's a pretty easy solution. It's a good problem for them to have. They have a log jam there. They're going to have to sort through. I'd say I feel better about it. I would still probably say I'm on that like 8 or 9 or 10 win like fence. Probably leaning more toward 10 at this point. I'm not a big predictions guy, but like if I had to make a prediction today, I would probably pick one of those two. And then I feel that this team is capable of winning the Big Ten West. And it's going to be an interesting race this year with Iowa got better with their offense. They made some changes. Purdue is going to be interesting just because they added a guy at quarterback in Hudson Card, who I think is a pretty good player. And Minnesota's got their starting quarterback coming, or the young kid. I don't know how to pronounce his name either.
Yeah, me neither.
Kind of an alphabet. He looked good against the Badgers last year. I know they have high expectations for him. So I think the West is just it's another year where I think overall the Big Ten West in its last year, say goodbye to it. The Big Ten as you've known it, it's going to be better overall, but probably the same kind of race. Like there's a lot of teams that got better this offseason, a lot of new coaches. And I didn't even mention Nebraska. They're kind of, in my opinion, maybe a dark horse team this year. I don't know what to really expect with them, but I think Rule will improve that program and have them on the right track this year. But I feel good about this team after watching the practices. It was a kind of a small sample size, but I think they feel good about most of their position groups. They're, like I said, there are some question marks, but there always are, right after camp, and season's coming here in a couple weeks, 2 weeks or so now, and it'll be exciting to get things underway.
Yeah, I can't wait. He is Mike Hogan at M Hogan Reports. Great insight as always. Please go give him a follow. Check out what he's doing over on Rivals. Mike, thank you so much for tuning in, man. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
On Wisconsin, and we'll talk tomorrow.